know it's no pain, no gain. Go hard till the end. What's the use of playing the game if you ain't aiming to win? My feet.
Okay, good. Thanks everyone for coming. Actually, the funny story about this new book of mine is that I came here to speak, I don't know when that was, 2 years ago or something, and you never know what's going to happen in Silicon Valley. There were some guys in the audience from Huawei, the big Chinese vendor. It's like a copycat of Cisco. And I'm originally a telecom entrepreneur, so I've done like real significant business with Huawei. So I had a good relationship with them, and then they said, hey, Andrew, would you mind becoming an advisor to us and helping us form our new corporate venture capital group? We've basically copied everything at Cisco except for the investing side. And I said, all right, well, sure, I'll do that. Here's what I'll do for you. I'll go and interview Cisco. I'm good friends with the Cisco investment group. And I'll maybe interview another 20 or so. And I'll ask them specifically, how do you do everything? Like, do you have an investment committee? Does the head of a business unit have to sign a piece of paper? You know, basically, how do you do it all? And then I'll share that information with you in a report that's just for Huawei. And I will write a book with probably like what we get their approval to put in the public domain. And so I was planning on getting done with this in a year. And about a year into it, I'm supposed to go on my summer vacation and write the book after all these interviews I've done. And I said, I'm having too much fun. I'm going to keep going. So I did another year because like every other day I'm having like lunch with some guy who's the head of corporate development at LinkedIn telling me about his idea of how to do CVC. And so it was a lot of fun. So it's finally done. And it just came out in August. So thanks guys for letting me come here and talk about it. And I noticed there's some Russians here. This is my first book, which the Russian version is the best one actually because I completely updated it. It was like a year later. McGraw-Hill is just the worst company in the world to deal with. And they didn't let me make any changes on the book, which was kind of annoying. So if anyone's interested, that's the other one. So here's the new book. So it's called Masters of Corporate Venture Capital, which was almost the exact translation of my book in Chinese, which I thought was much cooler. McGraw-Hill called the first one the Bible, and I thought that was kind of annoying. So I'm going to talk a little bit about corporate venturing, or CVC, corporate venture capital, from the perspective of any corporates who are scratching their head and thinking about doing it, or they already have one. And then I'm going to spend most of my time talking on the perspective of the founder of, you know, is this too dangerous to even get involved in, or what should I be aware of if I want to raise corporate venture capital and even be successful at getting some corporate venture capital and successful at making it work as a partnership and getting more than just the money. Let me first understand the audience, and maybe I'll gear more of my talk if I get a better understanding. Are there any corporates here? Okay, so I should basically just jump right past that. Okay, are you guys all entrepreneurs, or are any of you investors? Raise your hand if you're an entrepreneur, like a founder. How about if you're an angel investor? Okay, any VCs? Okay, all right, well, let me see then. So the first thing I did in every single meeting I had with all the CVCs I met, and I think I met more than 100 during the research for this book and the little Huawei engagement, I said, why do you do this? So, you know, Mitsui has got like $50 billion of revenue a year. For them to try and invest in venture capital deals and return capital and move the needle on that business, they would need to be the largest VC fund on the planet. And they would probably make a disaster of that if they tried to do that. So with most of them, I said, what are you trying to achieve with, you know, operating this activity of co-investing with VCs like me? And I basically listened to all the different reasons. And there's a lot of good reasons. And even any one of them could justify a $50 billion company like Mitsui throwing $100 million a year into the venture capital stream. But I think the main things are, it used to be that a huge R&D, you know, group inside of a big monolithic company like HP was where innovation was happening. You needed like supercomputers to, you know, crunch numbers or whatever. Now everything has gotten so much cheaper to create a startup that innovation is happening in the startups almost more than they are inside of the R&D lab of IBM and Hewlett Packard. So, and then a lot of it used in some countries like Japan, the best top graduates from the best schools still want to go work for a big corporate or work for the government. In most countries, that's kind of shifted. People want to be Steve Jobs, they want to be Bill Gates, they want to be a founder. So there's like more and more of the patents. It used to be 5% of patents were with startups. It's now at over like 35, and it's probably going to go to 80 or 90. So these corporates need to reach outside of their organization to access innovation that's happening in founders floor and all of your startups. So they basically have offensive reasons to do it and defensive reasons to do it. If you really want to raise corporate venture capital funding, it's probably worth understanding what their drivers are and what they're trying to achieve. And it'd help probably make you more successful at getting the money and then getting something more than just money and working with them. But the truth is, there's a lot of things that are bad with CVC. And I lived it firsthand because in '97, I closed a $25 million investment from Lucent into my company that I founded called the Global Tel Exchange. And then they put more money in different rounds in cash too. So I had almost 30 million just from a corporate, and they were not as cool as the other VCs to me. I don't want to go off on too many tangents, but like one simple thing is that most venture capitalists raise a fund, and they get every year an annual management fee, which is typically somewhere between 2 and 3% of the fund. So Dimitri, if you and I raised a $100 million fund and we were 50-50 partners, we'd get 2% of the 100 million every single year to pay ourselves salaries and expenses for a good 10 years. Sometimes by year 6 it declines a little bit, but hopefully you've got a new fund and you're stacking fees. So we're getting, Jelmar Vinblad this morning, I met him, and he just raised a $600 million fund. It's now like the biggest fund in Europe for venture capital. And so his management fee is pretty cool. So like right there, he was talking to me about like what he's buying and stuff, So, you can make a lot of money in management fees, but then you invest, let's say we invest the $80 million, that's after the 2% times 10 years. We've now pulled 20 million out of the paid-in capital. After we invest the 80 million and we fully deploy the fund, and we divest and we're receiving cash back from exits, from IPOs, M&A, and maybe selling shares in the secondary market, we pay 100% of the paid-in capital, so the 80 plus the 20, back to our limited partner LP investors, and then we would have 20% of all the profit. So the way VCs make money is called 2 and 20. 2% management fee, 20% carry. And there's some variations on it, but when you work at most CVCs, you get a base salary, and your bonus might be tied to the performance of the company rather than your investment portfolio. So if you see someone has still working at a CVC after 7 years, that's probably the most unskilled person on the team, because the skilled people manage to take that experience and get jobs somewhere else making 2 and 20. So when you're going through your journey of going up and down Sand Hill Road, meeting like 80 different VCs, you may notice that the CVC ones were not the sharpest ones. They're not here, so I can really talk openly about them, right? So I'm going to skip over the advice to corporates because I don't think anybody really cares, about that so much. So I guess I managed to spread that on 3 slides. I guess the first thing as an entrepreneur is understand what the dangers are. I know more CVCs now, having just done this book, than I even did before. But I kind of think I know most of the active ones. One thing is that 1 out of 5 VC financings right now has a CVC in it. That's like in the internet software connected hardware world. If you get into the healthcare life science, it's even more. And if you get into the healthcare life science and you were to really examine who are the LPs in their funds, they're mostly big pharma, in the big industrial titans of the industry. So if you're in healthcare life science, you should take the time to learn more about CVC, because it's going to be in your life. Like a lot of people say, hardly a deal gets done without a CVC, a healthcare life science CVC in the deal. And all these VCs, their money is from those same companies anyway. So that's one thing. So I don't know what the percentages are, but across all the industry, it's 1 out of 5. So there's a good chance that if you go on to raise VC funding, or you already have, you're going to encounter some of them. Also, there's a huge amount of variance. You've got like your 200-year-old company that employs kind of zombie, unskilled people on the CVC team. And then you've got like Salesforce, with Salesforce Ventures, where Benioff, the CEO, is an entrepreneur himself. He's like a total swashbuckling guy who loves venture capital. He's in the deals, and he's driving the culture of what Salesforce Ventures does. And their strategy is like so different than what you normally see. In the old days, like the 90s and the 2000s, a lot of CVCs would say, look, we just invest in a couple other VC funds, and then they bring us the deals that are really scale-ups. And if we can get a big partnership with one of our business units, we'll invest in like the Series C. So you don't see them in seed, you don't see them in A, you don't see them in B. They come in like the C round. So the company raised in the olden days 5 million A, 15 million B, and now like a 35 million, huge C, with big participation from like, Verizon and Vodafone Ventures, and like that's what it looks like. These days, the CVCs realize they're not really achieving their objectives. So I outline all the objectives of why they're doing it in chapter 1. And if they really want to access business innovation happening outside of their R&D lab, they might want to know what's going on in 500 startups and Techstars and Founders Floor, and what are the innovating models happening out there. Anything that touches my core business, my peripheral business, or disruption is coming from places you never expect. So some of them, like Salesforce Ventures, they would go to Y Combinator demo days and say, we're going to put 50K checks into 10 companies, and just to get relationships with the other CEOs and that little entrepreneur network of all these people that are moving to the Valley. So just totally different than the past. But if you're going to make a decision to raise corporate venture capital because they've contacted you or you contacted them and they're ready to do it, it's an irreversible action that you can never pull back. Like if you raise money from Huawei Ventures, you probably have shut the door to ever selling your company to John Chambers at Cisco. Because if Cisco sees that Huawei's in there, they probably are worried about like, that's the Red Army IT department for, Cisco doesn't want anything to do with that at that point. So you really probably can't get anything done with Cisco. So be prepared to tie yourself and get married to that corporate for the rest of the life of that startup. And maybe it's worth it, because Huawei sold over 100 million smartphones in 2015. And so if you've got a mobile app and we can get the attention of Huawei to start natively putting your mobile app of your payment thing on 100 million smartphones, forget John Chambers. We can IPO this company on a discounted cash flow, if you can really get a company builder. So sometimes these corporates, it's amazing what they can do. It's just, you got to deal with a lot of bad stuff to get it, It's going to be very difficult dealing with Huawei compared to Sequoia, So that's just something to keep in mind. Little stuff like some of these guys will negotiate a right of first refusal, a ROFR, and that's not only did you just now close the door to Cisco, but if Ericsson wants to buy your company, you've got to offer the same deal to your corporate venturing, VC, and that's a bit of a problem, So I managed to get some stories from other people telling their story of saying never sign a ROFR, and try to push for a right of first notice if you have to do that to get it done. In some ways, that can be good. Google Corp Dev, so Corp Dev meaning the M&A group at Google, if they offer to buy your company and start going through due diligence, if they hear you're shopping the deal to anyone, they will immediately back out. So they kind of like Walmart flex their muscles as Google to do that. But if you're like, dude, I already signed a right of first notice, they're like, oh, then it's fine. So you're like, sweet. So I can inform my CVC and get a bit of an auction going and not just let Google turn the lights off and take my company for whatever they can get. So these things get a little complicated. Like a little kind of like war story, if you haven't lived it or heard of it, like a very classic, timeless Greek myth of CVC is, you manage to get your VCs introduce you to the CVC. You take money from the CVC. You had one business unit decide to like become a customer. And then all of a sudden, 99% of your revenue is from that one corporate. And then they realize this is now core inside of some of their own product service offering. They cannot allow you to fall into the hands of their competitor. And now, long before you expect it to sell, their corp dev is giving you an offer to buy your company. That's when you just figured out that the CVC was sharing a lot of information with the M&A team at that corporate without maybe really your permission. And when you were out looking to raise money, you're dealing with M&A exiting of your business already. Then they'll tie you up for 6 months of due diligence to buy your company. And then at that point, you're dual tracking. At the same time, you're shopping like a $10 million round on a pre-money of 40 to other VCs saying we could do a quick flip because this big corporate wants to buy our company. How does that look? And our revenue just went, last quarter went from 0 to 5 million in revenue. That happens really only with a corporate. And then all of a sudden, they'll say, oh, the CEO blocked the deal. He didn't sign. So we're pulling out our customer from you too. So now you went from 5 million in revenue to the quarter to 0. Your dual tracking shopping of your VC round falls through, and your head of sales quits and goes across the street to some Kleiner Perkins backed startup because you're in Soma and you have an unstable team. So you can really get screwed. And then when you have no other options, you go back to that evil corporate and say, all right, what do you give me for it? I can't keep getting divorced and I keep failing startups. And so then they buy you on the cheap. So like that's the classic kind of story that you hear people like Fred Wilson at Union Square, scream, I will never, 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 never work with a corporate again. But on the other hand, getting onto 100 million smartphones might make, dealing with some cultural differences with the Chinese well worth it, to make your business grow like crazy. Yeah, I think one strategy is just don't worry about wolves in the hen house destroying your startup with these evil stories that you hear, like the one I just told. Go take the meetings with the CVCs because it's a great way to run up the flagpole to that corporate and maybe get a partnership. You can go into these meetings with the mindset of, I would never take money from you guys because I've heard bad things, but I'm going to go through your process and see if we can find a business unit that's ready to partner with my company. And I've done my homework, and we'd love to, build on Force.com or whatever, getting partnerships going with them. And you may discover that these CVCs have, changed the way they operate, and they're actually very cool. And even maybe the VC guy who's leading the deal has carried interest, so he's not going to abandon you 2 years later. So I say go in there and take the meetings just to see if you can get a partnership with the startup and get it on the radar of the CEO of that massive company, and you can choose to decline to take their money. If you do take money from a corporate, I think it's good to have a balance of power and be mindful of who else is in your financing. I think it's good to have a non-corporate VC in your syndicate to justify your valuation, and it's important. If you find yourself with all corporates, that could be a dangerous situation. There's a lot of conflicts of interest here. I mean, if the CVC is the same person that runs corp dev, his real alliance is to buy your company rather than fund it and make a return, because it's M&A that really moves the needle on these companies. Ultimately, they're using CVC in concert with M&A to diversify their products and services and protect themselves from being disrupted. And they're going to try to make it look like there's a Chinese wall between CVC and corp dev, but there's not. I advise them to say that there is one and have a fiber optic cable sharing the information. So I don't put that in the book, but that's the truth, right? So with governance, there's the two big things in these term sheets is what are the economics and what's the governance, meaning like who's on the board type stuff. And I personally think CVCs should never get a board seat. And they want board seats so that they can say, oh, I was on the board at Twitter, and then use that to get a real job at 2 and 20 making money. If you have to give them a board seat, then you should start having 2 sets of board meetings. The board meeting with that guy who's the wolf, who's really working for M&A, and your VCs who are more who also have conflicts of interest with you, but not nearly as bad as those. So just kind of some things to think about. I would say how to do it. It's basically everything that you would do with a normal financial independent VC, but more. So I think it makes sense to try to, and I could put these on SlideShare, and we'll do a thank you note so you guys can just get all this info. What was I saying? Oh yeah, do your homework and try to find out so what can we do with them? So I've got a portfolio company that has this wireless radio thing, and we were thinking, well, if we do partner with Huawei, we could have them stick it in all the CPE they ship, all the customer premise equipment. We could literally have an IoT network covering all 80% of the Chinese population in 3 years. And so you start thinking of what we can do with that corporate specifically. So when you're in there pitching them, you're not just saying that you got an MBA at Stanford or Harvard. You're saying look, we don't know a ton about what you do, but we know that you guys are shipping around 100 million smartphones a year. You're doing this, you're doing that, and try and show them strategic alignment. The other thing is, if you can find out how they're structured, and you got a meeting with IntelCap coming up, I think it's not a bad idea to get their playbook before you kind of get on the field and play with them to understand, how it is that, they're set up. I would ask always, are you M&A or are you investment, or is it separate? And I would ask lots of questions, of how they're structured. Is there an investment committee? Who is on the investment committee? Does the CEO of IBM actually have to sign off on a $500,000, investment, for us to get funding? How often do you do follow-on investments? So with a VC like me, a lot of VCs have the strategy of invest in a wide set of companies. So for us, it's 25. And then almost try to write the smallest check you can at that point and help these companies as much as you can with your network. So you're like a big data continually pulling data off of all these companies. And if we see a buy signal that the company is going to actually launch on 100 million smartphones, Gordon Gekko would be buying stock in that company with that inside information. You go to prison because it's publicly traded. With us, these are privately held companies. That's a good buy signal for me to double down. So our view is invest in a bunch of companies and double down to make more money. A lot of these CVCs don't really care about that money, and they're more interested in these other strategic returns. So another crazy fact is that the average duration of a CVC from the time that they have their launch party, we were at the HP Tech Ventures launch party with our good friend Vitaly Golub. This is the third time in my life HP has announced they're launching a CVC. It's the third time. They shut it down on average 2.5 years later from the launch party. That's right. And so even if the person who led the financing round from a CVC is your champion, even if he wants to stay there and he's happy with his $350,000 a year salary, they're going to shut the whole program down, and there'll be no money for anybody because they just decided to get back to their knitting. Right now, the average duration of a CVC is trending at 4.5 years between launch party and shut it down. And so you're statistically likely to be orphaned, and that there'll be nobody at that CVC to invest in your next financing if you do a funding round every kind of 18 months or 2 years. Then again, some VCs, they're not multi-stage either. They're there for this round, and they're going to introduce you to other people. And a lot of these guys are awesome. And I could just say all positive things, and I think I'm coming across too negative here. But I think it's worth understanding a little bit of what you're into, and maybe drive some of your diligence when you're asking them questions. And I think the easiest way to get the truth, people in the Silicon Valley tend to say things that aren't fully true because they want to believe. They're too proud to tell the truth about what the real revenues are or something. So a way to get the real truth is go speak to their portfolio companies. Get on Crunchbase and look at who they've invested in the last couple of years, and then reach out to them directly if they're not willing to make the introduction. And then ask them what was, how pleasant was your experience with these guys. And a lot of the new ones are totally setting them up to be hip and wonderful. So a lot of this negative stuff of the past is changing. And I'm hoping that the book helps these guys realize, they might want to adjust some of their practices to be a bit more founder friendly and even effective and keep their own team in place together for more than 4.5 years. A lot of them have strings attached, so you'd want to get that. You want to understand that as quick as possible, and I think you also want to understand the timeline. Startup speed and independent VC speed is really fast. These corporates are natively slow. So I would kind of take those first meetings and see what they can do for you biz dev wise, because you might get something awesome going and not even have to take their money. But if you're looking at building a syndicate with their participation, and the round won't close without them in it, you gotta protect yourself and make sure you never run out of cash, right? So I guess I already spoke about some of these governance things. I've seen our portfolio companies burning like $50,000 a month on legal bills, going back and forth with Cisco and these guys, where they're trying to get all this licensing stuff and an amazing amount of things that you didn't necessarily want in order to get the funding. So be really careful about your legal bills getting out of control. Out of control with them. I guess I already talked about the board seats. In the olden days, you had to have the signature of the head of a business unit. Like that was Motorola, one of the earliest ones. So at Moto Ventures, you had to have the head of a BU. So you almost have to make the enterprise sale to this, huge company, and then after that's done, then you maybe can close a funding round, with them. I think the most rational way to do that is that you're actually interested in getting into the enterprise sales cycle with them, and then use corp dev to rapidly be, hand-holding you right to the head of the BU you want to be talking to. Maybe you get it, and also, if you look at how you get orphaned so easily because the person that led the investment left and got another job at another corp dev with a bigger salary, or 2 and 20, even if the program is still alive, it's good if you invested time in having the BU guy love you and be your champion. That guy actually might be friends with the CEO and the CFO, and even if they've stopped the program, they still support you. So I would get an insurance policy, and don't just be comfortable with like the cool CBC who wants to buy you lunch every quarter. Get more friends in that company and try to get something out of it, with that partnership. I kind of covered some of this stuff. Even with a lot of VCs, when people say here's our process, we'll sign the term sheet, it'll be like 4 to 6 weeks of commercial, legal, technical due diligence or something like this. It's amazing how the money doesn't come on the day you needed it. If like payroll, if you've got money for like to get through November 15th payroll, that's a lot of pressure, and you're now dealing with corporates. It's even worse. Even Huawei took forever to pay me the money they owed me on the consulting. It was crazy. So it's always bad with VCs, but it's even worse with them. So I want to leave some time for questions. I think net, the opportunity to have a company builder that really just builds your company overnight is significant. And you can flirt with them by talking to their CVC group and not take their money, or you can make yourself comfortable that this is the right thing to do, and take their money. In my first book, I talked about company builders like Skype. Nicholas and Giannis founded Kazaa, which was a copycat of Napster. And then when they launched Skype, to me, it wasn't all that unique, and I screwed up because I had a chance to invest in the voice codec. But they put a button on Kazaa, and they had 11 million uniques stealing their music and everything else from Kazaa, like a Napster, and that is what gave them all their users for Skype. And then the rest is like, hey, mom, you need a fax machine for me to fax you. So it's all that natural networking stuff. So it's good to have a company builder, whether it's a CVC or not. And so Skype had Kazaa, and it became the biggest hit in European history of startups. So I think it's good to try to use some of these corporates. Also, a lot of Sand Hill Road guys are like, focus on San Francisco, and then we're going to focus on New York City, and then go to Chicago and LA, and then we'll go to England because they speak English in London. By the time you've gone to London, you've got not just 3 copycats, you've got like a swarm of killer fish trying to kill each other in Beijing copied you already. So by the time Uber gets to China, Didi is already like the big monster gorilla. So I think it's kind of interesting to me. for Rubicon to raise money from corporates and, in theory, cover the world. Get some guys who have distribution in 22 Muslim countries. Get them as an LP in my fund, and if they want to resell one of our portfolio companies' products, we know right who to go to. They're LPs in the fund because they're looking for strategic returns, not just making a lot of money from their investment in my fund, but they want to be not just reselling the Sony PlayStation, but they want to be reselling whatever the latest IoT crap is, you know? And so, and then just have lots of insurance companies that can partner with our big data companies, and just lots of corporations investing in my fund. It's one way to raise capital, and you guys all need money, so if nothing else, it's a source of capital, but that we should be in a position to enable you to get on all the Huawei handsets without closing the door to Cisco at all. Nobody needs to know who my real LPs are. It's really kind of confidential. And even if, you know, Chambers at Cisco finds out that you've got funding from Rubicon and that we have money from Huawei, we have money from Cisco too. So, you know, it all of a sudden kind of makes that big boo-boo kind of go away, I think. So that's a little bit about, you know, how we see ourselves fitting into this overall very complicated, you know, world. I mean, what happens on the M&A side is incredible. Like, there have been times where I thought one of my portfolio companies was totally kicking ass, going really fast to a multi-billion-dollar valuation, and then all of a sudden it's falling apart. And I'm on the phone to Cisco and VMware and Ericsson and Huawei saying, who wants to buy my company? And what you hear in the back channeling of people telling you the truth about, yeah, we invested in that company, but we really bought the competitor of the company we invested in. You're like, holy shit. That's incredibly, you know, horrible stuff. So it's very interesting to have access to all of that, you know, kind of truth. And, you know, you're friends with this one guy. He's not going to stay at Cisco forever. Nobody really, very few people do. They'll probably, you know, get his 5-year vesting and get out and do something else and get a better offer. So you have relationships with these people while they change, you know, the different companies they work at, and hopefully they have some ethical relationship with you, you know, as an individual. Super fast on Rubicon, and I'll stop and we'll get into questions, is we have an office in New York and an office in San Francisco. I run San Francisco. We invest in late stage seed as the first investment into a company. So we probably want to see you've raised already $1 million of non-founder money before we take a lot of time to start really looking at what you do. So probably most of the companies here, I don't know, might be too early for us to really look at. I think we say on our website, you have to have raised at least $500K before we want you to email us your deck, you know? So sometimes we've invested in pre-seed, but it's usually what used to be Series A, kind of like not the demo day, not like the 500 Startups kind of Techstars demo day round, but the round that comes after that one. If we actually see that the current financing will last the company for 18 months, that's our magic rule. I believe in an 18-month runway with the first bite in the company. And for some companies, they don't want to sell too much stock while it's cheap, so they're going for these shorter runways, like raising $500K every 6 months for 2 years. And that's the right thing for that company, but it's not a fit for us. We want to see 18 months, you know, with the runway at the time that we put the money in first. Once we're in, we'll go much shorter on bridging the company through difficult times. But I don't want to invest in a company and see them run out of cash too quickly and not have a chance to try some stuff. Sector-wise, we're pretty broad. We invest in internet, software, and connected hardware, both enterprise and consumer. And I guess geographically, it's mostly San Francisco, Bay Area, and New York, but we can invest anywhere. We've come close to investing in French companies, UK companies. I lived in Europe for 15 years, so I know a lot of the VCs, and even like Yelmar, who just raised the biggest fund, you know, old friend, and I stay in contact with them. I do a fair amount of travel. We've raised money from a lot of different people at different levels. So we've raised money from angel investors that are just accredited investors. $100,000 is our minimum investment, so we try to make it easy to get in. And then we've raised much more capital from family offices and corporates and institutional investors. We've got a bunch of kind of just insider ecosystem people, so investment banks that are as big as Jefferies to little boutiques that do sell side like Growth Point Technology Partners on Sand Hill Road. All they do is M&A, venture, sell-side stuff. And I love being able to get them on the phone and say, what do you think we could ever sell this company for? This is the valuation. If we wanted to make a 10x, do you think that's plausible? And then there's just a lot of back and forth with this network. So a lot of people invested in our fund, I almost think, to get into our network. And I view diversity as positive. So I like young guys that are like got really lucky and they're still in their 20s that are out partying in San Francisco, meeting other angel opportunities that I don't go to because I'm a little too old for that now, as well as having older people that are, you know, they're smart plus experience that can, you know, help us in a lot. So diversity is what we like. The more international, the better. I think that if we have LPs that are huge family offices in different parts of the world, we can help these companies go to China way faster than the classic Sand Hill Road guy would advise you to do. And we wouldn't do it unless we thought we really can de-risk this thing and make it work. One thing we do, which is a bit strange, is we have this sidecar fund thing. So we have our VC fund. So if somebody puts the 100 grand in the fund or 10 million in the fund, whatever, that gets diversified across 25 companies, and we end up putting probably half the fund dollars into the top performing winners. So it's sort of de-risked. And it's pretty early stage. It's pretty early stage venture capital stuff. Whenever we can, we wire money to the startup. So let's say it's a $5 million round and we put $1 million from our fund. We can say to the CEO, can we make $1 million available to our LPs? And with their permission, we email a sidecar memo to everybody that invested in our fund. And we say to the angels, you can put in as little as $10,000 into this round if you want to and double down. Or, you know, we have up to 2.5 million or whatever it is. So if you want to put a bigger check in, you can do that. So we end up taking custody. They all wire the money to us at Rubicon. We put that into a special purpose vehicle, which is like a VC fund to make one investment. We call it a sidecar fund. And then we wire that money to the startup. So if Dimitri is the CEO, you got a very clean cap table, just Rubicon. You could just think of it like Rubicon did 3.5 million into this round, even though it was $1 million from the fund and 2.5 from a subset of our LPs that wanted to get involved. What I've witnessed is that even the guy who does 10K, it's a drag, and Yelmar with his new $600 million fund thinks we're crazy to deal with this pain in the ass. But I think it's a great way to have heightened level of transparency with our LPs, and we've got guys at Facebook, Cisco, everywhere that are in our fund. If they see the sidecar memo and they're reading it carefully, because they're like, maybe I'll put in 100 grand into this thing, they're like, oh, I should introduce this company. I just got back from Shenzhen, China. Let me make an introduction. If they put a little bit of money in on top of what they put in the fund, they're much more motivated to like meet the CEO and take you out to dinner and get really involved. So I think like one more person at 100K is another node in the network, and that's very important to us, and they can deliver value to the CEO. The idea that the VC has to do everything on her own or his own doesn't really scale. I mean, how many boards can you be on before you go crazy and you're ineffective? And so sourcing deals, vetting deals, diligencing deals, and post-investment value delivery for us is done with a lot of interaction between our LPs and our portfolio companies. Like last night, we had a rooftop dinner on my partner's house in Meatpacking District where we had about 70 people on the roof eating and drinking and networking, and everyone gets to meet the CEOs. So when they do get that sidecar memo, they're like, oh yeah, I remember Today Ticks. That company's killing it. I'm in for 250K, and I'll help the guy too. You know, so there's just, if you don't animate the network and have a lot of networking opportunities, it doesn't really work. And the sidecar memos, I think, are a cool way, you know, of doing that. So that's really it. So if anyone wants to get in touch seeking funding, and you haven't already raised money from a major VC, it's much better to send it to Matt. It's like a Polish name, Mateusz. It's just mat@rubicon.vc. That's the best guy to go for to, you know, send us a deck or something like that. And I like it when you send us in numbers that actually say, this is how much I've raised so far. This is the stage I'm at. If you're pre-revenue, say it up front. I personally hate going through like 40 pages of vision before I figure out, is this remotely a fit for what we do? If anyone is interested in looking at either investing in our fund or introducing me to some rich person, you know, or a corporate or anything, it's just andrew@rubicon.vc. The book is being translated now by our LPs that are actually VCs in China and Japan. And we've got a Korean translation going. Russian is actually almost done. I'm going to be at Open Innovations in October for the book launch, and the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Russia is sponsoring the book, so it's kind of cool. So my interest in all of this is mostly tied to raising LP dollars from people who can make our network more powerful, and we can, help the startups more. So with that, why don't we go to questions?
Yeah, love to open it up to questions from the audience here. Andrew. Appreciate you spending your Thursday with us.
Okay, and before I forget too, we do some events ourselves, and if you go to Rubicon.vc and click on events, we've got a lot of them are these private events just for our investors in our portfolio, but in the public domain, we're doing one at Galvanize. That's where our office is in San Francisco. So I mean, it's a lot of traffic for you guys. Maybe you Caltrain it, but it's November 2nd at starting at 5:30, and it goes to 9, and it'll be about 350 people in total. And I'll do a short talk, and then I moderate a panel of 5 big CVCs. So guys that are in the book, like Citi Ventures and Salesforce Ventures and Intel Capital. So you'll meet a lot of VCs there, and a lot of angels too come to our events. And everybody actually gets a copy of the book. So that's that one. We're doing the same event in New York, and then also in London. And if anybody knows anybody in Turkey, I'm going to be in Istanbul looking for capital flight. Money that's looking for a safe home. If anybody knows anybody in Istanbul, I'd love to hear from you. And then I'll be in Moscow and China all in the next couple of weeks.
Good. I want to open up the questions here, so think of your questions, and I'll come over with the mic. I'll start off with questions here. So, large corporations, when they want to get into a sector, they typically look at it from a buy versus build decision for themselves, and so sometimes what they'll do is they'll go ahead and put some money in certain startups that are in that sector, knowing full well that large corporation could potentially go ahead and end up trying to build internally what that startup's trying to do is also. As a founder of a startup, how do you protect yourself with that? You want their money, you want their deep vertical expertise. At the same time, it could be their frenemies. Enemy and frenemy. It could be.
Yeah, and a lot of VC funds will say, we need to check some boxes to get an investment completed, and this is just not checking any boxes. And one box that Intel Capital is probably the best one out there. They've been at it the longest, and a junior co-founder of Intel is the founder of Intel Capital, so they always had that endless support. Is eyes and ears, so it's eyes and ears of the emperor. This is just business intelligence, check the box, done. And another one is it's a hedge. We're investing in a company that is directly competing with a major initiative that we have. So that would be Blockbuster Video investing in Netflix, I think in life that young people are more worried than they should be and having paranoia about all Chinese people are out to get me and all these corporates are out to destroy me, that they shouldn't worry about that. And not everyone in China is trying to copy you. They just want technology and transform that economy. So they might not be lying to you. They literally want to invest in your company, and they want to help you fill up some empty building that they've made for startups over there and help you make stuff, cheaper and sell into the China market. So I think you shouldn't be so paranoid. One of the biggest mistakes I made in my career, probably the biggest mistake I ever made, was turning down a strategic investment from British Telecom, Telefonica, and AT&T. And I even got Level 3 to send me an email, which I showed to my board, that says, Level 3, another telecom company, says if we take the money from those 3, former monopolies, they will end all business with us and we'll lose that revenue. Dumbest mistake of my life. I could have IPO'd my company on a discounted cash flow basis from the revenue I would have gotten from just those 3 huge monster-sized companies. So very stupid. And every entrepreneur, the younger they are, the dumber they are on this, and they're worried about I apologize if this sounds really rude. There's actually a lot of women here, which is great to see, but hopefully you'll see the humor in it. I say to the young entrepreneur, that's there's 3 women in the bar that want to go to your hotel room with you right now, and you're saying no because you think it'll inhibit your ability to eventually sleep with every single woman in the disco. Just go to the room. Take the money. They're not so bad. So sorry for that. It's not in the book. Got edited out.
Question in the front here.
Yeah, so you touched on the length of time, and so a lot of entrepreneurs avoid CVC somewhat because of the time drain, and so in terms of Series A specifically, like what would be the value proposition if you, for taking CVC money at the Series A level, if you're not gonna, because their sales cycles are long, and so, Intel or whoever, Samsung, whoever, it's gonna take you X number of months to do distribution with them. What would be the rationale for taking money as opposed to just continuing a relationship?
Well, I've been making wide generalizations, like they're all long and stuff, and that's not true. You may find that some of these guys, like Salesforce Ventures, are faster to just throw money at you because they're not going to be paid on the performance of that investment. They don't even care. $50K for them is just nothing. They want to go home, and this demo day is getting long for them, and they don't care at all. So they're like, look, you want to take it? I see a few people I'm friends with in there, God bless. So sometimes you'd be surprised that it's not the CVC of the 80s and the 90s that you're, torturing you. I think that in like Samsung and Intel are really good at what they do, and Qualcomm, and they've learned that when they're too slow, they fail to get into the current round where it was at like a $15 million valuation, and they get into the next round at a $100 million valuation, and they realize we should have gone faster. They either finally get their legal department to work properly, or they just start using Oric and like DLA Piper, who know what they're doing, and they understand this stuff better than your contract, in-house legal group. I think that there's some cases where there's a real value prop that's worth suffering for. Like, it's not going to be easy or fast with Huawei, but 100 million smartphones could be important to you. And then there's other times when, you really like the people you're dealing with. Like, I always tell entrepreneurs, when you're facing a choice of which VC do I do the deal with, now that I've got lots of interest and they can't all be in there because their ownership target percentages just make it impossible. I say, think of 3 major building elements of the decision-making equation. 1, what's the reputation of the fund? Does Rubicon have a good reputation, or does everyone hate them? Is this Sequoia or Kleiner Perkins? That even if that should be considered meaningful. The second one is what's your chemistry with the partner who's leading this deal? If it's Sequoia, but you just hate this person, don't do it. Trust your spider senses in your stomach. Do not do it. And the third one is, what's the economics? Do I like the economics of what this is? On that topic, I think most founders are way too sensitive to dilution, just like they're way too paranoid that the world is out to get them. And that, if anything, when you're dealing with like a club corporate deal, they often foolishly let the valuation get higher than it should get. And you might burn through that cash and struggle to get a flat or up round for that. So actually be careful to not raise money at too high a valuation from a corporate, because you might put the entire company at risk of failing to raise the next subsequent round, because it's just too hard to go up from there, or no financial VC is willing to touch it, and now you've got a bad board and no balance of power that you like, and then you got M&A people running your life.
Question in the middle here.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm raising seed, and I'm in negotiation with some corporate dollars, and I'm just wondering sort of what are some things warning signs or conditions to put in place?
I think that in general, unless the corporate is called like Al Qaeda, I would probably just take it. If you're able to get them to move in a time frame that works for you. I think most entrepreneurs should take the money and hope that the investor doesn't destroy value, and that all these VCs are giving you their pitches like I did about how we're going to add so much value. They're really not. It's only us. We're the only one. Yeah, we're the only ones that really add the value. I honestly think most VCs are destroying value, and they're just a pain in the butt. So if that answers your question. Or ask again, and I'll give you a short, direct answer. What to watch out for? I think the biggest thing to watch out for is corporate speed not being compatible with your startup speed. I think the one thing that's concerning is they're telling you to be patient to do business with them, and their process takes a long time. You just can't do that. Usually, you've got to make moves in the seed stage, and get cash in the door, and all this other stuff. We're happy to keep talking, but if you're not able to wire money within 8 weeks, we're going to put this on pause, and we're going to focus on getting our cash in the door, because if we don't, we're going to die. Another thing to do is, to say, look, if you're incapable of going through your process of chasing your CFO of a $100 billion company about a $100,000 check, let's just talk about a joint development project, and I want to talk to the BU head, business unit, and not you, and see if I can get that guy to pay me $80,000 a month to make him the software that he wants. And now you've got functional requirements and a customer and you're in revenue. And get away from those CVCs that are incapable of moving fast enough.
Question.
Was there a question back there?
You mentioned about the legal fees. It can go, $50,000 to try to negotiate these deals with the CVCs. How does a small company manage those legal fees?
You're not a lawyer?
Fortunately not.
Okay. Well, I think that in my first book, I even outline, it was trying to be really practical stuff, for the reader, saying, all right, so these are the legal documents that you actually need if you're starting a company. And some people might overlook, I need an employment agreement, but I'm the CEO and the founder. It's like, yeah, you do. And you'll be happy you had one later, And then so I say, these are the docs you need, and you can go to a large firm like Oric or Cooley or DLA Piper or any number of these huge firms that do this stuff day in, day out. And if they like your pitch, and if you were introed from the right people, they will say, look, this is what we charge for each one of these things, and this is what we charge for helping you get through your angel funding and your convertible note and your first priced equity financing. We're willing to defer up to $25,000 until you've really got the money to pay us, and that's not going to kill you. So basically, we're ready to back you as Wilson Sonsini or DLA or Oric because we like you and we think you're probably going to get to the Series A. And if we don't do that, we're not going to be the incumbent counsel for you to get all this great legal fees that pay for this wonderful table we're sitting at, Then there's other ones that are these smaller firms that are saying, I used to be at Wilson Sonsini and they're charging $1,035 an hour. I do it for $150 an hour, but you got to pay me. I think you're better off deferring all those bills and going with the big firm that's willing to do it not for free, but only pay me when you've got tons of money, because they're probably better. They're probably better than the guy who's no longer at Wilson Sonsini, and the money you're spending on the Wilson Sonsini could go a long way to paying a salesperson or something that you really need. So that's my advice there. The other thing, and this is going back to when I was a CEO, never stop paying attention to what's happening with the legal bill. I remember we hired our lawyer from Pillsbury Madison Sutro, great acronym, PMS, and they decided to drop that and just call it Pillsbury. So Pillsbury Madison Sutro, Keith Mendelson was my lawyer. He met me for lunch and he said, I want to join your company because this is going to IPO and I'm tired of watching you children get richer than me. I want to be in on it. But his salary was the highest salary in our company. We were paying ourselves $150K in the 90s and he was 180. And he's like, you can justify that on the savings you're going to get on the legal bill. Our legal bill went up. Now he's like, we got to get patents in South America. So I think that the big thing is just never let, when things are happening and you're litigating disputes and stuff, or There's a lot of weird stuff going back and forth on the licensing agreements with the corporate. Just make sure that you're looking at it weekly and say to the lawyer, like, hey, you work for me, send me weekly updates on what my bill is, because I don't want to let it get too high. And that's going to probably prevent him from even padding as badly as he was going to do anyway.
Question up in the front here.
Hi, I'm Raj from Blue Green Networks. We are a fundraising platform. So just a quick question. Typically in a year, you're trying to do a product fit and all those things and try to streamline your product. At what particular stage you think I should go for a corporate venture funding? Not me, but as a founder, in the life cycle in the first 4 years, which is the ideal and which is not ideal? Like never it's too late or never it's too early.
I would say that things have changed. And the short answer of where we are now is contact them or be introduced to them earlier than you would otherwise consider. And then you can always say no. You can always say no and just make sure you're not wasting time. You'll have a sense after the second meeting if they're asking you for a lot of things and see what's under the hood and everything inside of your technology, then it's at that moment that you say, is there an investment committee? Who's on it? What's your process? How long is it going to take? Introduce me to 2 of your CEOs that you've invested in, all that. I wouldn't be that rude on the first meeting, but if they want your time, now you deserve to know. Take the meetings anyway, because it might just run it up the flagpole. You're never going to take their money, and something good can happen. In ancient times of the 90s, when I was dealing with Lucid and Motorola Ventures and all those guys, it was Series C, like I was saying before. The product market fit is real product market fit. It's really scaling. And now you're getting major partnerships with major business units, and you're a real company. And you don't really want to deal with these guys. They're not as smart as the other VCs, and let them mess around with you until you've already gone through Angel A and B. Where today, I think they're changing. I'm hoping I'm sending my copy of my book for free to every CVC I know. I'm hoping they're going to wise up a little bit and get a bit cooler and realize that if they wait for Series C, it's going to be too late for them to, change their aircraft carrier ship to deal with what's happening in the real world, So they should go earlier than they did in the ancient times.
I think we have time for one more question here.
Well, last thing too is, customer financing is a great thing. If you can go through the CVC route and get into the right BU, the business units, and say, this is where we're at right now, and I don't want to necessarily move resources to just developing for you, but if you pay me $100,000 a month, I can go hire 10 more guys in Chennai or whatever, and I'll dedicate a team for you, and then you give me your functional requirements, I'll make it exactly the way you want it. Every now and then I'll tell you, like Steve Jobs, what you don't know you want, but I'll generally do it just like you want. And then you come out of there with just non-dilutive revenue and a good logo, and you give them a sweet deal on that, on the licensing, but you keep the intellectual property, and and that's a good thing, customer financing.
Last question right here.
My question is about the relationship between CVCs and the business unit. In the survey you did, what percentage of the CVCs require business unit buy-in, and what level of buy-in? And a related question, how do you keep that due diligence from exposing so much of your technology that you're really teaching them how to do what you're doing? Are there some tips you can share?
Okay. I think that I've heard a lot of CVCs say, unless you've got the buy-in from head of a BU, there's no way to know if this is really strategic return. It's easy to measure financial return and performance with, internal rate of return, IRR, and IRR and cash-on-cash returns. Whereas it's hard to measure, did we protect ourselves from being disrupted? Was it a good idea that Salesforce invested in both Box and Dropbox in the seed rounds, which they did? It's hard to measure all that. Whereas if you get the BU to sign off, that's something we can all get behind at the board of directors to justify $100 million a year into this stuff. So I think in the old days, it was 100%. You had to get the BU. And it was, I don't know, like IBM has different letters for what level you are. Like there's, the CEO, and then there's B, and then there's C. I think you needed a C level person to answer. I would imagine it's different everywhere. I think that if a CVC is doing well after a couple of years, they start just completely abandoning all their red tape processes and just saying, you guys are doing great. We love the fact that you invest in that one company and it's sold for $1 billion the year later. You can do whatever you want now. Just don't worry about getting my signature anymore. Just don't lose more than 100 million a year because you just made us like 200 or 300 million. So, they may start off really tough and then loosen it completely. That usually happens at most good ones. On that one, I would stick with all entrepreneurs are going to be more paranoid than I am. I think that they're not really out there to get you. And I generally think that one of the reasons why Boston and Waltham, Massachusetts lost to the Silicon Valley is because they're all like covering their laptops and asking for non-disclosure agreements and just basically not being helpful to each other. Whereas in the Silicon Valley, if you're too afraid to talk about what you're doing, then maybe this is too much of a fragile thing for me to even get near. I like a CEO that's confident, there was a time when people were like, oh, you should be careful about sending our documents about how we do the sidecar because they're going to copy us and start doing systemic SPVs like us. I'm like, that's not the magic at Rubicon. It's not our legal documents, So don't worry about anything and just make sure you're not wasting your time with them, I think it's good to ask conflict of interest questions directly to people's face. What is your intent? You're asking me very detailed questions, and I want to understand what your intent is. Should I be worried that there's a not invented here issue with you, or just go right out there and just put it right out there in the open and see what they say.